Good morning and welcome to the Blockade Runner podcast. This is John, and with me this morning is Ryan.
Good morning, John.
And we are back for the Power of the 90s series for 1993. So if you were with us in the fall, Ryan and I put together a couple episodes about Star Wars stuff in the 90s. We're calling that series The Power of the 90s. Took a little break for The Last Jedi, but back in the fall of 2017, we covered 91 and 92 and a little bit of 1990, but it was a pretty dark time, 1990. So, but each year here in Star Wars in the 90s, things are picking up and gathering steam. So we are back for 1993, and we'll be doing these monthly all the way through the 90s. So we're going to talk about Star Wars comics. We're going to talk about Star Wars books, video games, and whatever else was going on with Star Wars in 1993. Why don't we start with books, Ryan, and just chat a little bit about the Star Wars Expanded Universe books that were happening in 93. We talked on our last episode about Heir to the Empire, and the first book on our list here is The Last Command, which is the third book in the Heir to the Empire trilogy. So that huge, groundbreaking moment in Star Wars in the 90s, the Heir to the Empire trilogy, which is still just a mammoth kind of event in the history of Star Wars, wrapped up here in 93. So pretty big moment. I have not read this book. Have you read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I read the trilogy. It's been is it Stained?
It's been a while.
Yeah.
That one? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a while. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm down with that reference. Yeah. No, I haven't read it, but it seems like this is the book that features the birth of Jason and Jaina Solo. So I know that they were, obviously major figures in the entire expanded universe. So pretty big deal. But yeah, I've been meaning to go back and check these out. So hopefully I'll find the time to do that soon. I would love to read these. So a friend of ours, Ben, over in Maryland, I think, actually met Timothy Zahn at a convention yesterday and had him. I think he said he signed 9 of his books.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, but Ben said that Zahn is his favorite sci-fi author, and he was like super excited. He'd met him once before, but yeah, he was really excited to see him again. So that's cool. And of course, Thrawn. I'm looking forward to Star Wars Rebels coming back in a week or two, and we'll see some more Thrawn. So Jason and Jaina, not so much part of what's going on in Star Wars lately, but Grand Admiral Thrawn, of course, is. So I think these books are still obviously very influential. And yeah, I mean, it's we've talked about it on both of our Power of the 90s episodes we've done so far, but Heir to the Empire and Timothy Zahn and that whole trilogy of books, I think, is just a huge part of getting Star Wars going again in the early 90s. So that's a pretty big moment right there. Now, the next book on our list I have read, but as you said, it's been a very, very long time, and that is The Truce at Bakura, Star Wars, The Truce at Bakura. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume you've not read this one.
I have not.
Yeah. Don't really remember too much about it. I remember that I was fine with it at the time. Like, I liked it well enough. It's a book by Kathy Tyers is the author's name, and it is set right after Return of the Jedi. But I don't remember too much more about it than that. As is implied in the title, it's sort of like a little bit about political stuff and what's going to happen after Return of the Jedi. But it features, all those classic original trilogy characters and stuff. So yeah, this is like the time when Star Wars literature and expanded universe books and stuff are just starting to get rolling. So
Mm.
I probably be fun to go back and take a look at this one too. But like I said, I got this from I didn't say it yet, but I got this from the public library in our town way back when in the 90s. And it was like one of the, I don't know how many books they had at I was going to the Rockford Public Library downtown, the downtown branch. And the downtown branch had a pretty decent section of Star Wars books in the sci-fi section. So that's where I would grab just whatever Star Wars books they had. So Truce at Bakura was one of them, as was Courtship of Princess Leia and some other classics from back in the day. But anyway, those are the two kind of EU books from 1993. Last Command, wrapping up the Heirs to the Empire trilogy, and Truce at Bakura. So still a very manageable number of books, but I think that was exciting at the time, to have 2 new Star Wars books that year. So
yeah.
Also exciting, Ryan, and a little bit of a bridge from our last episode. There were 3 more Jedi Prince books.
Yes,
in 1993 as well. Who could forget Mission from Mount Yoda?
Oh, I love Mount Yoda.
And Prophets of the Dark Side. So those 3 books came out in 1993. Now we spent a lot of time talking about the Jedi Prince books on our 92 episode.
Probably too much time.
I'm thinking so. Yeah. So we probably don't need to talk about them too much more here, except for to say that just like Heir to the Empire, the Jedi Prince books sent shockwaves that reverberated, or still are reverberating through the Star Wars universe now.
Yeah, that glove of Darth Vader still touches everything.
What's our villain's
in every pot?
Oh, what's our villain's name with the?
Oh my god!
I told you I was gonna cut out a piece of paper and make like a little third eye.
Yeah.
So everyone would know I'm truly the son of Darth Vader because I have my third eye. No, those Jedi Prince books were really cool.
They're super fun.
Yeah, very fun kids books. So there's 3 more in 93. But that's it for the kind of like what would you say, like narrative Star Wars novel type things. But of course, there were more West End Games books as well in 1993. We've got at least 4 on our list here. So there was the Galaxy Guide 7, Mos Eisley, the Galaxy Guide 9, Fragments from the Rim, and then Han Solo and the Corporate Sector source book. And then you picked up one yesterday, right?
Yeah. It is, and if you're watching the video version, I am holding it up right now, and that is Dark Force Rising source book. Again, based off the Timothy Zahn novels, and again, like just full of cool post Return of the Jedi factoids and characters and equipment. And there's something I actually really like at the beginning of this book. It says, "This and all other products that take place after the events depicted in Return of the Jedi are the author's vision of what may have happened. The true fate of the heroes and villains of the Star Wars universe remains the exclusive province of George Lucas and Lucasfilm Limited."
That is cool. The sort of genesis of legends being born right there in that West End Games book. I don't have a copy of like Heir to the Empire or Truce at Bakura or anything around here. Trying to remember if that kind of little note was in all of the Star Wars literature of the time, or if that was reserved specifically for the source books.
Yeah, this is actually the first time I've noticed it. It could have been in there. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, yeah, we've talked about them on all of the Power of the 90s episodes, but the source books, of course, are for use with the role-playing game. So again, this is like a huge part of what was keeping Star Wars alive in the 80s and 90s. So things are starting to pick up in 1993, but these were these were instrumental in keeping Star Wars fans sort of, engaged all through the late 80s and early 90s and stuff. So very cool. And we somehow didn't put on the list, but I was looking at our Google Doc here, and it's like, okay, Galaxy Guide 7, Galaxy Guide 9. What about Galaxy Guide 8? That was released in 1993 as well, September of 1993, and that one is called Scouts. Galaxy Guide 8 Scouts. Yeah, so that was about the what character class of the Scout, who I'm reading here was a free spirit and an adrenaline jockey eager to plumb the depths of his own curiosity.
Wow,
so that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, exactly. So the Scouts would seek out cultures and worlds lost or abandoned during the dark time of the Empire. So yeah, that would probably be pretty sweet to check out as well. Also really cool probably to go back and look at these days. I don't have a copy. I don't think you do either, but the Han Solo and the Corporate Sector source book. I think would be very cool to go check out. The Han Solo, the Corporate Sector is something that was part of the early Han Solo stories in the EU. And I think there's some suggestion that might be part of what's going on with Solo, or at least that the corporate sector idea may be brought back in Star Wars canon in some way or another. I believe it showed up in one of the visual guides for one of the movies, the corporate sector on a map or something like that. So, yeah, but now that we're in Han Solo season, you know what I mean? We're recording this in February of 2018, so we're just a couple months out from Solo, a Star Wars story. So, any Han Solo focused EU stuff from this era, I think is definitely pretty interesting to go back and look at these days. So,
for sure.
Cool. Should we move on to comics?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So there's two big things happening in comics in 1993. The first one we talked about a bunch last time we recorded, so 92, and that was the Dark Empire comic series from Dark Horse. So we won't get back into what that is so much, but the trade paperback of that first series of Dark Empire books was released here in 93. So that's just collecting that series of comics. Again, we talked all about them on the last episode, although the conclusion of that first series of Dark Empire comics is pretty interesting now in light of The Last Jedi, as Luke Skywalker sort of did a force projection thing in Dark Empire way back in 1993. And obviously we saw that happen, or we saw that concept come back in The Last Jedi. So I would guess Rian Johnson read Dark Empire in the 90s at some point. I guess it's hard to say for sure. I know he's a lifelong Star Wars fan. I don't know if he was one who would, dip into the comics as well, but obviously that was a super influential, piece of Star Wars literature as well. So pretty cool to look back at that now and see that, Luke was force projecting back in 1992 and 1993 in Dark Empire. So
that is cool.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So now let's talk about the other comic series from 1993, which is the Tales of the Jedi Knights of the Old Republic. Maybe something here that's also a little topical these days. We don't know for sure, but the rumors are swirling and the conclusions are being made. Whether they're erroneous or not, we can't say. But there's some Knights of the Old Republic excitement in the air as well. So pretty cool to go back and look at these. Now I've been looking at Knights of the Old Republic, Tales of the Jedi 1 through 3 over the last couple days, and I think you went back and read them too, right?
Yeah, I actually have the trade.
Oh, okay.
From Dark Horse and Lucas Books.
Okay, nice. So I've been reading them on Marvel Unlimited. So a little plug for that service.
A great digital service.
Yeah. So if you're a big comics fan, I'm sure you already know about Marvel Unlimited, but it's $10 a month, and there's a tens of thousands of comics on there that you can read without purchasing them. So Netflix for Marvel Comics. I honestly, I just signed up so that I could check out some of these old, Star Wars comics, specifically these ones. I also was looking up single issues on eBay and stuff, and they are pretty inexpensive. So maybe I'll grab them from there to have them in the collection. Although I don't have a Star Wars comics collection to speak of, so it would sort of be the beginning of one, I guess.
It's a good thing to start.
Yeah, I would really have liked to have gotten the Dark Horse omnibus of Knights of the Old Republic, but looking at that, trying to find that online, it's really expensive, probably like $80, $90, $100 to get that at this point. So
it's definitely much cheaper to just buy the original Dark Horse books than like the omnibuses.
It's nice to have that big omnibus on the shelf, though. You know what I mean? That's
sure. So Knights of the Old Republic, definitely a hot topic in Star Wars fandom for sure. I think most of the conversation around it does stem from the video games, the BioWare games and Obsidian games, I guess, whether it be the first two single player games or the MMO. But if you actually read Tales of the Jedi, Knights of the Old Republic, it's similar, but it's also very different than the approach that BioWare took. I feel like the BioWare games definitely worked in a lot more familiar elements into their games, whereas the original comics are very they almost feel like a high fantasy story. They're very, very low tech. And there's a lot of just like monsters and swashbuckling and a lot of people just like hanging out wearing rags and not so much in the technology side. Whereas I feel like the video games and like the comics and books and everything that would come later were somewhat informed by the Star Wars prequels and the approach taken there with the tech.
Yeah, and you know that I'm not an expert in, by any means on any of the Knights of the Old Republic stuff. I was surprised though looking at this because I thought like just in terms of comics and stuff, like, well, number one, there was not a lot of blood, but there was like there's some blood here and there. And it's very 90s, like it looks very 90s, and like the tone of it and everything I feel like is very 90s. And then I was like, wow, this is like got Judge Dredd vibes almost, like in the soldiers and stuff. It just feels like it feels just as much like 90s comic books as it does 90s, or as it does Star Wars in general, I guess you'd say. Which is cool, I think, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm not feeling the Star Wars vibe all that much from these comics. So it's just as much like like Dark Horse 90s comic style type thing, at least to the layman like myself. That those are the vibes I'm getting off of it. The other thing I would say, Ryan, it almost has like, and I feel like cliche or almost like, like I'm just reaching for the low hanging fruit here, but it almost has like a Game of Thrones style like plotline, where it's like, and that's why I think it's a particularly, kind of interesting at this point, because people are like, oh, are those guys doing are they doing Old Republic? And then like the first like Knights of the Old Republic thing I look at is like, whoa, this feels very Game of Thrones.
Yeah, so, it's very high fantasy.
Yeah, but also just like it's about like different like and I guess maybe this is implied in high fantasy or whatever, but like different factions like all warring for a throne sort of thing,
Yeah. I mean, I guess that also has like shades of like the Mandalorian conflicts as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what BioWare did, and I think they did it successfully, is they took this Knights of the Old Republic concept of, a a time where there were more Jedi and um, pre what we know. Um, they took it and they added in a lot of shades of Star Wars. Again, both informed by Phantom Menace and by the original trilogy, to make it much more familiar feeling. And, like if you're reading this, you're um, don't expect to see like Darth Bane or like any of those kind of parallels. And like even, I mean, a lot of the characters and um in Knights of the Old Republic, like, Mission and her Wookiee friend, and Karth as like your Han Solo esque. Well, no, I guess Mission's more of the Han Solo, but like there's so many more parallels um in the games, whereas this just really feels like its own thing. Again, like much more informed by fantasy and 90s style comics, and I guess political thrillers. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. And I think it's well worth checking out.
Yeah, and I think for like what we're doing here, which is just kind of going back and sort of glancing at all the stuff from the 90s and kind of taking a look back at it and stuff, it's kind of better this way, you know what I mean? That it's sort of it has its own identity, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's definitely its own thing here. And so just to get a little taste of like what was going on with Star Wars in the 90s, like you can for sure feel the 90s in here, you know what I mean? Just as much as the Star Wars. So
the power of the 90s.
The power of the 90s. Yeah. So anyways, yeah. I was happy to check it out, and maybe doing this series is gonna. When do we start getting like Knights of the Old Republic games and stuff like that? When does that mythology start to develop? Like 2000s?
Yeah.
But there are more comics, though. There's definitely more comics set in the era.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with the ones that came after this original arc.
Yeah, but you're gonna
until we get to the 2000s ones. So I wonder if like those would start coming closer to what the first BioWare game ended up being.
Yeah, like how much of that was developed by BioWare versus how much of it was developed, in some of these other stories and then brought into those games. So
yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's kind of it for comics in 93.
I think now would be a great time to talk about the Star Wars Galaxy cards, because those are very 90s comic adjacent.
All right, let's do that. Yeah, let's hop over to the Star Wars Galaxy card series from Topps. Ryan, you and I are both equipped with our gold foil cover Star Wars Galaxy book collection. I think I either posted about these on the blog or we talked about them on episodes, or maybe both of those things. But these books are so good. So good. Edited by Gary Garani. I believe is the author's name, and he worked on all these Star Wars cards for Topps. And you get like a little, introduction, which kind of is a multi-page essay, sort of history about the series of cards, and then visual reproduction of every card in the series. So comes with some collectible cards as well. And just like a super great package. But anyway, so if you don't have a complete set of Star Wars Galaxy cards, Topps cards, which I'm going to guess you don't, I highly recommend going out and picking up this book. But let's talk about the cards themselves.
Yeah, so this was one of my entry points for Star Wars fandom back in the 90s, because at this point I was frequenting comic book stores, and I was a big fan of the Marvel Universe trading cards. And
Yeah, those were awesome. Yes.
Yep, and those the success of those cards actually inspired this Galaxy series. It was more of like a um the idea that you could have trading cards that were just for fans, essentially, that weren't like a movie tie-in or anything else. They were just like for fans to collect, and they'd have to have interesting art and interesting facts and all of that, which the Marvel cards did really successfully. And also, so I was, becoming familiar with a lot of comic artists and art styles, and I started to kind of develop, my tastes in comic art and all of that at this time. And these cards are drawn by like hot comic artists of the time, and even from like previous eras. So I went through and I marked some of my favorite cards from this first series. And we're just talking about the first series here, because the next series would come out next year, or the year after, 94.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, is it cool if I just get started?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay, so one of my first favorites is this picture on page 38 of Luke and the twin sons, and it is done by Paul Chadwick, who did the comic Concrete for, I believe, Dark Horse. So that's super cool. Jeff Darrow has an awesome Hoth card here on page 41. This one's really interesting. Page 42, we got some wacky droid art here by Steve Ditko, the co-creator of Spider-Man. So,
yeah, that one is cool. Very cool. And Steve Ditko kind of like not working that much at that time, if I'm remembering correctly. Is that true? Or
yeah, I'm not sure if he was in his reclusive state yet, where he has resided for quite some time.
But yeah, that one is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say that card is really cool. It's got a very different, obviously, look than most of the cards in the Galaxy series. And
yeah,
the whole point of the Galaxy series is to like have, different artists like sort of reinterpret moments from the movies or just like stuff from the Star Wars galaxy in their own kind of style or whatever. So this is very much like, it's R2 and 3PO in a droid factory type setting, or like not droid factory, but maybe like that scene in Empire with the Ugnaughts and the all the droids everywhere and stuff like that. And so it's like evocative of that moment, if not inspired by that moment, but has a very different kind of look to it. So it's cool.
Yeah. Jumping ahead, page 62. This is one of my favorite cards in this set. And it is a Tusken Raider by Mike Mignola, who would, he'd do a lot of, he did a lot of work at Marvel, and then would go on to create Hellboy.
Okay. Is Hellboy Dark Horse?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That's got a very distinctive look to it. The broad-shouldered Tusken Raider there, the broad-bodied Tusken Raider. So yeah, that's pretty cool. It's got definitely a very Mignola look, like with that little skull in the corner too and everything. I don't know. I should know. I don't know if you know, but if Mike Mignola ever did any Star Wars books at Dark Horse. I'm not aware. So that's
That's a
something
good
for us
question.
to.
I would not be surprised if he did.
Yeah, no. So if he did, I guess they'll pop up in our research as we continue our way through the 90s, huh?
Yeah, yeah. Right next to it is a Mobius C3PO that is just full of detail and like density with a lot of that Mobius style art there, which is very cool. Jumping ahead even more, page 72, we have a Yoda picture by Joe Quesada, who is now the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Also, weirdly, Joe Quesada was instrumental in getting the NES into retail stores in the United States in the mid 80s.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever read that.
Yeah, that's also just completely an
Did he work?
aside.
Did he work at Nintendo
He
or did
worked
he?
in retail,
Oh, okay, all right. Like
and
marketing.
yeah, he saw potential, and I think I don't know if he got it into like J.C. Penney or one of those like chain stores. So
Okay, well, thank you for my childhood, Joe Quesada. That's
yeah,
awesome.
for
Yeah.
sure. Another one here, and I'm probably going to mess up the name here because I've never really learned how to say it, but Bill Sienkiewicz, I think.
Uh-huh. Okay.
It's his Darth Vader helmet with just layers that you can kind of
It's
semi-transparent.
like a look inside the mask kind of thing, like what's
Yeah,
behind the helmet. Yeah.
and he's an artist I really love for his work on New Mutants back in the 80s.
Okay.
And then yeah, that is it.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
those are some
really
of my
cool.
faves.
Man, I'm looking at there's a really cool one on page 80 from Dave Stevens of Luke Skywalker with the wide-eyed sense of wonder. It's is the caption from Gurani there, but yeah, that one's awesome.
Oh, that is cool. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, there's a ton of great ones in here. So again, like definitely get the book, but we're always finding stuff, unfortunately, as we go through and do these. Like we spend, a month or whatever kind of putting together the notes and putting in as much stuff as we can. But we're always finding stuff that we kind of missed, I think. And an example of this, and something I really wish I had picked up in the lead up to this episode. There were a couple of books put together, trade paperbacks put together by Gary Gurani in the 90s, in 93 and 94, called The Art of Star Wars Galaxy, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And they feature forwards. The one that came out in 1993, Volume 1, features a forward by George Lucas, which would be, I think, very interesting to read. And I would just love, as much as this book, that we're using today is a fantastic collection, it would be really cool to go back and kind of pick up that trade paperback and sort of see how it was presented in book form there. And then the Volume 2, which I guess we'll talk about Volume 2, or we'll talk about the kind of following series in Star Wars Galaxy a little bit in the next episode. That features a foreword by Ralph McQuarrie, which obviously I would love to read as well. So,
oh wow,
yeah. I guess I'm viewing this now as a place to start. I took the dust cover off of mine, which it's awesome. It's got a piece of gum that came with the cards on the front, and then on the back, like a broken up piece of gum. So,
yeah, that very hard gum.
yeah. So anyways, maybe I'll try to track down those trade paperbacks because that would be really cool. to have and to look back at those forwards and stuff like that. So, but yeah, Star Wars Galaxy, like super cool. And again, like, you know, a big part of, especially in the early 90s, a big part of, I think, what was special and valuable about the Star Wars stuff is the way it was keeping Star Wars alive when there was not, you know, new films, and it seemed like Star Wars was a little bit on the dormant side. So a project like Star Wars Galaxy from Topps is, you know, exactly what I think Star Wars needed, was new interpretations and artistic interpretations of stuff from the Star Wars universe. So very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we jump into games, video games? And this is another.
I do have one more book.
Oh, you do?
2 more books.
Really? Oh, okay. Well, no, let's do it.
So one of them, my wife just found for me yesterday at a used bookstore she was at. She just saw it and grabbed it. And that is Starlog Presents, the official magazine, Star Wars Technical Journal of the Planet Tatooine.
Oh, okay.
This was actually released in 1993, and it was kind of like a premium magazine with a lot of technical blueprints and such, but some pretty cool fold out posters of Millennium Falcon and where everything is in there, and some maps.
Okay.
Again, like kind of that fantasy theme that seems to be permeating this episode. And yeah, it's and then just a ton of shots from the films as well. So just another thing that was on newsstands. And then also, of course, because it was something on a newsstand in the 90s, it has a holofoil cover with an embossed logo.
Yeah, you have to do that. You have to do that. Yeah. Okay, cool.
That's one of the books I have. And the other one is another Abrams joint, and that is Monsters and Aliens from George Lucas. And this is one of the weirdest Star Wars books in my collection, at least. Probably the weirdest Star Wars book in my collection. It's a book highlighting the monsters in Aliens. I guess, yeah. And it's very unique in the approach. What I'm holding up right now is kind of like a fake National Enquirer style news article here. There are like letters from aliens in here. There's a whole bunch of alien poetry. Lots there. We have pledges as well, kind of mission statements. But my absolute favorite is the Employee of the Month plaque for the Gamorrean Guard. Which some of the highlights why the Gamorrean Guard received this Employee of the Month plaque include for being punctual even when there is no concept of time, for volunteering many more times than necessary to take the Rancor's temperature.
Okay.
Yeah. For stomach display. For accepting this award.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So
like I said, just super weird. It's like, it's not like laugh out loud funny. It's just really weird, but like super enjoyable and quirky, and yeah, I think it's a really cool thing to have in your collection.
Yeah, that's super cool. I got to track down a copy of that for sure. I wonder what that goes for these days on the secondhand market.
It's fairly inexpensive.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, with content like that, as much as I'm into that, I can see where, it might not be like the most sought after item
Yeah.
for Star Wars collectors,
but it is it is Abrams quality. Like, the paper's great. It still holds up really well. And the art is like super varied and like really really high quality. So
yeah. And again, I mean, not to be a broken record here, but if you're kind of into or excited by the sort of the time capsule quality of like going and collecting a bunch of Star Wars stuff from the 90s, or just going back and looking at a bunch of Star Wars stuff from the 90s, which is obviously a huge part of why we're doing this, then the fact that it's got that kind of weird tone and like a sort of goofiness to it is like, it's maybe one of the most 90s things on our list of Star Wars stuff for this episode of Power of the 90s, I would say, huh?
Yeah,
just based on your description, because I don't have it, but
yeah, I don't know. It almost feels like more timeless, and like it could have come out at like any time. It could have come out in the 70s, or it could have come out last week.
okay.
Yeah, it's because it's so weird and it's so different than what we sort of expect out of a Star Wars book.
See, that's the thing. I can't really imagine it coming out now. Not because the world is so different now that you wouldn't have like that kind of content, but like because Lucasfilm is, it would just be surprising for me to see them put out something that sort of, I don't know if parody is the right word. It sounds like it has a little bit of an element of parody to it, or just, I don't know. Maybe they would. I don't know. But anyway,
Yeah.
with the focus on things being canon and all that stuff, I don't know if they would go down that route. But I don't know. Maybe we should start a letter writing campaign and see if we can get that sequel book put together. So
tweet at Pablo.
Yeah. I'm sure Pablo would have a lot of interesting commentary on that book. I have no doubt that he spent some time with it in the 90s and probably since. So
yeah,
that's cool. All right. So does that do it for books then?
That does it for books.
That does it for books. Okay.
Even though like there probably is so much more that that we have no idea. Like that Star Wars technical journal, like that's not on any like publishing page on Wikipedia or anything. It's not in the Star Wars year by year book. It's just something that was released in 93. So yeah, I'm sure there's stuff we're missing, but
yeah, one might assume that the task of Star Wars archaeology for the 1990s would be pretty straightforward. But yeah, you're always coming across things that you didn't necessarily expect. So
yeah,
which is a lot of the fun of it, though. So
for sure.
All right. Well, then let's jump into video games here. We've talked mostly completely about books and comics, I guess a little bit of trading cards, but the books and the comics, huge part of Star Wars in the 90s, especially the first half of the 90s. But I would say, if there is an equal in terms of influence and reach and keeping Star Wars alive and going in the 90s, two books, it would be the video games that were just huge in the 90s, especially like early on here, 93, we're talking a lot of PC games that are really well remembered and that people spent a ton of time with and were very influential, and even a Super Nintendo game here. So let's start with X-Wing.
I think 93 might be like the turning point where Star Wars games become mainstream. And I think we're going to see it with some of the at least one of the releases next year in 94. But yeah, I think 93 was it's kind of crazy because we are talking about so many PC exclusive games here, but they were, or at, I guess I shouldn't say PC exclusive, but launching originally on PC, because I don't think we really it's such a console game dominated market now, but you got to think back in this time in the 90s, 93 was the year that Doom released, and PC gaming was pretty huge and pretty mainstream. So yeah, so we are going to be talking about some PC games here.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think like the first one, the one that's maybe most well known or whatever, is Star Wars X-Wing, which is a flight sim type game from '93. So this is one that probably tons of people with PCs back in the day that were playing video games at that time played X-Wing. Most Star Wars fans probably played it. I didn't, unfortunately. I didn't play it then, and I do have it on my PC now. And I've been meaning to pick it up and start playing, although I've been mostly playing a different Star Wars PC game lately, so I didn't quite make it to X-Wing, but I know that you have spent some time with X-Wing, and you can kind of speak to that one, right?
Yeah. X-Wing is great. X-Wing and TIE Fighter will come out, I believe, next year or 95. But X-Wing is very to me felt very inspired by one of my favorite PC games of the era, which was Wing Commander, which was originally very inspired by Star Wars. The creator, Chris Roberts, is a huge Star Wars fan and a huge fan of, also like a lot of the World War II films that inspired the dogfighting in Star Wars, and you can see all the traces of his fandom in some of the ship designs in Wing Commander, all the way through his casting of Mark Hamill in Wing Commander 3 and 4 as the main character. So Wing Commander came out in 1990, and it kind of introduced like it wasn't the first like space flight sim on PC or anything, but it was I would say the most accessible, and it also had like a really compelling narrative surrounding all the dogfighting and everything. And so yeah, that came out in 90, and then I would say it definitely inspired a lot of the design in X-Wing, in that like in X-Wing you can you can kind of roam uh the base, and now I'm getting some wires crossed here. It has been a really long time since I played X-Wing, but I believe there are NPCs you can talk to similar to Wing Commander, and I believe there's like a combat sim in the base as well, where you can like keep high scores and stuff, which is very, very similar to the Tiger's Claw in Wing Commander. So yeah, this was a game that as a Wing Commander fan and a budding Star Wars fan, that was definitely one of my faves back in the day.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to going and playing X-Wing, just because I know how influential it is and how well loved it is. So unfortunately, I don't have too much more to add since I haven't played it yet, but I'm excited to do that, and they're very easy to. Well, I shouldn't say easy to. I mean, they're easy to buy on Steam, but they're not necessarily easy to play on Steam, which maybe we'll talk about a little more with. We can just jump to it now because it's maybe similar. Rebel Assault, which is a Star Wars PC game that came out in November of 1993, and then it was released on some other platforms as well, like the 3DO and the Sega CD. But yeah, it was primarily a PC game, I guess, at least to start, at least in 1993. And I found, as I got this on Steam, as well as X-Wing and TIE Fighter and all those games, that it is, I would say I would say it's impossible to play without a flight stick.
Mm-hmm.
And then even with a flight stick, it's nearly impossible to play as well.
Yep.
It's so hard. It's so hard. I looked around on some forums and stuff, and I found some suggestion from some other players to drop the frame rate really low. So I did that, and when you drop the frame rate really low, it becomes playable, like sort of. So I played and got maybe like 5 or 6 levels into the game.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and I was actually recording it to post along with this episode, but my recording messed up in the end, and I lost the footage. So
Oh.
I'm gonna play through it again. I mean, like, to get through 5 or 6 levels of Rebel Assault. I mean, I probably spent an hour just trying to figure out how to play the game and like trying to make the game work, and it was a nightmare. But then once I kind of figured out how to do it, probably like a half an hour of gameplay or something. You know what I mean? It's not like an insurmountable thing to go back and recreate. But it's just so hard to control these games. Even with the stick, they're so touchy and really, really difficult. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to play through, at least not yet. I haven't been able to play through the entire game, which I would like to do. But yeah, really, really tricky. Now it's cool. It's very hokey in a fun way. It features some full motion video type stuff. And it does not really feature like the actual film Star Wars characters. So it has some new characters created for the game, like
Rookie One,
right? Rookie
Yep.
One. But it's funny though, it uses like mostly all the same locations from the games. You start out on Tatooine, and you're going through Beggar's Canyon, and I mean it's just like really like really similar. It didn't go too far outside the box in terms of Star Wars concepts and locations and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I would imagine that at the time, 1993, this would have been pretty killer. As you're finding yourself in the cockpit of one of these Star Wars spacecraft, and it's pretty even now. I would say it's pretty immersive. In a way, in feeling like you're controlling a ship, and especially when you're using that stick, to control, and it's pretty, I would say it's pretty successful in that way. It's just so hard, but and definitely cheesy, definitely really hokey and goofy, but that's fairly at home with Star Wars anyway. So it's cool, but God, it's so hard.
Yeah. So this is a game that was kind of born out of the multimedia craze of the early to mid 90s. I ended up getting this game probably 94 or maybe 95 once we got a computer with a CD-ROM drive, because this was, I think, one of those, like alongside like Myst and like King's Quest V and those games, like the very, Seventh Guest, like CD-ROM focused multimedia games. And so I ended up getting it a few years after it came out, just because we didn't have a PC with a CD-ROM drive until then. But yeah, like I thought it was just like crazy impressive, and it was like one of those things you're like, oh, this is what all video games are gonna look like going forward, like this is the future. Like it was so different and impressive at the time. And actually this was also LucasArts kind of as they did, as all Lucas companies did, like really pushing the tech. They had like some proprietary rendering and video streaming tech here that they had developed for this game, and like motion capture and all of that. They sort of developed alongside and with this game. So it's I don't know, kind of an important piece of LucasArts history as well, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, cool. Well, like I said, I'm gonna try to play some more of it and maybe get some footage recorded. But obviously there's footage of the game out there too if you want to see it. So
Yeah.
and you can grab it on Steam and you can try. I also played the I tried to play the Sega CD version of the game, thinking like, well, that's a system that it had a more traditional controller. It didn't come with a flight stick, so surely they made it playable with a gamepad or whatever you want to say for a Sega CD. But no, definitely like it's so hard. I don't know. I guess just like people gamers in the 90s or whatever knew how to navigate those waters in a way that I don't, because they
had
really
cut their
hard.
teeth on Sewer Shark.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. Okay, cool. So other games from '93, one that we both played a ton, I'm sure. The Empire Strikes Back on the Super Nintendo, which I love, and we talked about Super Star Wars a ton on our last Power of the '90s episode. So again, this is one of those things where it's a sequel to something that happened in '92, and it's very similar to that. So we probably don't need to spend too much time on it necessarily, but these games were so cool. The Super Star Wars games, also difficult, but not in quite the same way.
Right.
And these were side-scrolling Star Wars action games, 16-bit on the Super Nintendo. Although they did feature some Mode 7, first-person flight, or I guess they're third-person, not first-person. But
I think there's both, because aren't there some cockpit?
Yeah, I think there are.
At least one of these games.
Yeah, I think you're right. I know, like, I'm thinking like back to Super Star Wars when you're in the
land speeder is definitely third person, but
right. But yeah, I think you're right. Like even I've just done the Hoth stuff in this game recently, and I think it is first person. So anyway, yeah, these games were amazing. Just like I talked about it a bunch. We talked about it a bunch on the last episode, but I love the Star Wars. I love Star Wars and that 16-bit, aesthetic with that 16-bit sound. And they're tough, but they're really, really cool. And they do some fun stuff with the license too, in terms of like characters and aliens and stuff that aren't so much from the movie, but provide good blaster or lightsaber fodder in a 16-bit Star Wars action game. So
yeah.
You can play as Han, you can play as Chewie, you can play as Luke. I don't think you get to play as Leia until 1994, but yeah, they're amazing, super cool games. So
yeah, and this is a lot of people's favorite in the trilogy.
The three. Oh, okay. Okay, so in following the pattern of the movies there, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose.
All right, and then there's one more video game from 1993 that we should touch on, and that is Star Wars Chess. Star Wars Chess on the PC. So did you didn't go back and play this, did you, Ryan?
I did not. No.
Okay.
I don't know how to play
chess. Okay, so I don't know how to play chess either, which is embarrassing to admit. But I have the game on my computer. I've booted it up. I've messed with it a little bit. But I don't really know how to play chess so much. But I'm gonna find out, and there is video of this game forthcoming. So keep an eye on the Blockade Runner blog or our Twitter account, and you'll or just subscribe on YouTube. Actually, that's the thing to do. Subscribe on YouTube. And I'll be bringing some hot Star Wars PC chess action your way. Yeah, exactly. Steamy.
So it's so weird that this game is what it is. Like, you'd think like you're making a Star Wars game and you want it to be a chess game, you'd think you would make Hollow Chess like as the game, but no, it's actually chess, and it's just the pieces are Star Wars characters. Right. Which I wonder, was there a Star Wars chess like actual board game prior to this that maybe was inspired by?
I doubt it. Prior to, I mean, there definitely have been Star Wars chess, boards or whatever, but I don't think I don't think there would have been before this, but I don't know. It's a good question. So yeah, I mean, here's the thing though. It's like let's see. It's the title here is the software toolworks Star Wars chess. But it's got like I swear somewhere it was called, maybe not. I thought it was called like Battle Chess or something, or maybe it's part of a series, like a series of games like Battle Chess or something. But
yeah, Battle Chess definitely was a thing.
yeah, and I don't know if it's from the same developer 100%, but I thought it was. But anyway, like a huge part of this game is like the animations on the chessboard, and there's like animations in between each turn. So let's say I pin my R2D2 against your Darth Vader, and your Darth Vader, like, what happens in chess? You jump me.
Overtake?
Yeah, I don't know if you win that round or that turn, or okay, we don't know about chess, but
Nope.
there'll be like a cool animation that takes place where Darth Vader, like, it hits R2D2 with the lightsaber, and then R2 like whirls around and smoke starts coming out and things start popping out of R2D2. You get what I'm saying, right? Or like if it was 3PO, like he loses his limbs, or whatever. And they're really cool. They're actually really funny. So I think that's maybe part of the reason, like, why it was probably more exciting to play Star Wars chess with like Star Wars characters than it would have been to play, Holo Chess or Dejarik or whatever with like the little monster guys and stuff. Because your chess pieces are R2D2 and Yoda and Boba Fett, so I mean that's pretty fun, especially with those animations.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, like I said, this is a really funny old game, Star Wars chess. And if I knew how to play chess, it'd probably be really fun still, actually, because obviously chess is one of those things, I think, though I don't know how to play it, that it's a pretty straightforward concept, right? Basic, sort of setup and concept. And so a chess game from 93 would probably hold up just fine in 2018. So yeah, it's cool in that regard. I don't think there's a way to like get this legitimately at this point. You can't buy it on Steam or anything.
Yeah.
But the ROMs are out there, so I would recommend checking it out if you're a chess person and you're able to use an emulator in some way. Yeah, then we'll talk about the Sega CD version briefly in our next episode, because it's actually different. I actually have video footage recorded and ready to go of the Sega CD version, but it's a little bit different. It's a port, but it's a little different. So anyway, that'll be coming up. So yeah, between X-Wing, Rebel Assault, Super Empire Strikes Back, and Star Wars chess, pretty good year for Star Wars games.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right. So as we start to wrap up here, just a couple other things that we should talk about that were released in 1993, which is starting to become a pretty big year for Star Wars. There was the Star Wars Trilogy original soundtrack Anthology that was released on CD. And that was a 4-disc set of the complete Star Wars soundtrack. So the first 3 discs were the soundtrack for each film. And then the 4th disc was a disc of rare bonus tracks and source music. And it came in this cool, like, tall box. And this one still sells for like $30, $20-$30, even though, it's CDs. So yeah. I was hanging out on an eBay auction from a Goodwill in California that was selling it for closer to 15, but I think I got outbidded or something. So that I never ended up grabbing that. But that's one that I'd like to pick up because it would look cool on the shelf. And I'm not sure about the mix and the mastering and all that of this Star Wars CD collection, because I think they're of varying quality throughout the 90s and 2000s, the different releases of the Star Wars soundtracks. But anyway, that came out and was no doubt pretty cool at the time. There was also the Star Wars Trilogy Definitive Collection Laserdisc set that came out in 1993. And I wish our friend Chris was in town. I would have asked him to bring it over so we could watch it on Laserdisc and hold it up here on camera. But yeah, this one came out in 1993, and it's. I think did we talk about the Star Wars Laserdiscs in the 92 or 93 episode? I think, or the 91 or 92 episode. I seem to remember talking about Laserdiscs in our Power of the 90s, but this definitive collection is really, really sweet because it's all 3 films. And then it also comes with like a 16-page booklet and a hardcover book called George Lucas, The Creative Impulse, which documents the first 20 years of Lucasfilm.
Yeah, we talked about the VHS.
Oh, was there a VHS version of this definitive collection?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, because the Star Wars trilogy had been released on Laserdisc before this too. Maybe it was before 91 or whatever. But yeah, this was really, really cool at the time, and this would be, I guess there's the THX versions of the original Star Wars trilogy coming up too, and I've got those over there on the shelf, so we'll look at those whenever that happens. But this would have been obviously one of the best possible home video versions of the Star Wars trilogy to have, and then the book that comes with it, and just the collector set and all that stuff. Very cool. So yep, this is another thing. I sound like a total hoarder or something, but this is another thing that I've kind of had an eye on eBay and would like to check out one of these days. So just to kind of have it. But yeah, cool. So there was those. What else? The Star Wars Bendham toys released in 1993.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah. So I don't have any of those anymore, or I don't know if I ever did really, but these would have been the first new Star Wars figures to come out since Hasbro stopped doing Star Wars toys in 1985. At least like widely released. So it's a sign of things to come there,
Yeah. And you also had the Micro Machines mini ships.
Yes, yeah, from Galoob. Yeah. The beginning of the Star Wars Micro Machine toy line. So that's also really cool. And then, if you're a Japanese Star Wars fan, or if you were in Japan at the time, maybe last thing for this episode was the George Lucas Super Live Adventure, which was a live production entertainment show in Japan that had all these performances that were those like recreations of stuff from George Lucas movies. And I don't know, I think like maybe a little bit like about his life and stuff like that too. So pretty crazy stuff. And I would direct you to the Blast Points podcast, and you can check that out. Their episode number 39, which was all about the George Lucas Super Live Adventure, and is a really fun listen. And they go into it in a big way, and kind of they I think they watch a video of it from on YouTube or whatever. So and kind of just talk all about it. But it's really crazy, really really interesting, unique kind of interpretation of some George Lucas stuff. So that would be cool to check out now. And man, it sounded like it was a huge thing. I'm reading about this in the Star Wars Year by Year book, which of course we always look at before doing one of these episodes. And it said, what does it say? 500,000 tickets sold for the Yokohama Auditorium in Japan. So it was, I think, a very big deal.
That's insane.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely go listen to Blast Points episode 39. They talk all about what was in the show, how the show went down. I think why maybe it never came over to the United States, which may have been planned at one point. So that's a must listen episode of a must listen podcast. So definitely go back and check that out as well. But I think maybe that does it for 1993 for Star Wars. What do you think?
Yeah.
Pretty big year, I would say. A banner year for Star Wars there. Couple cool books, lots of cool video games, and I think just the number of things on our list to talk about between all the different Star Wars mediums and stuff kind of we're starting to see that Star Wars is ramping up and coming back in terms of merchandising and books and games and all that stuff. So, as we jump into 1994 and beyond, there's going to be a ton of cool Star Wars content to look at. So I am excited for that. We're going to be doing these every month. Ryan, does that sound good? You down?
We will try.
Well, at least for March and April, I think, right? Who knows with May? We had to take a break for The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll have to take a break around Han Solo, but we'll try to do them monthly and continue our march through the 90s here. And then, as we get further into the 90s, we might have to start splitting them up too, as more and more starts to happen in Star Wars in the 90s. But yeah, until then, you can follow us at our blog at blockaderunnerpodcast.com. Please subscribe on iTunes. Leave a review on iTunes would be great. Tell your friends. Subscribe on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at Blockade Run, or Ryan, your personal account is at Brawn Dwarf.
BRAWNDWARF.
Yeah. And obviously a lot of exciting stuff on the horizon for Star Wars in 2018 as well. So we'll be doing shows about everything happening in Star Wars with Star Wars Rebels, the Solo movie, and other Star Wars developments. But we're excited to keep doing Star Wars Power of the 90s and looking back at that decade as well. So, stay with us at blockaderunnerpodcast.com, and then we'll be back with a new episode soon.